You might be asking a question, and it's an entirely legitimate question. Why do you put such a heavy emphasis on half guard passing in your coaching program? You just put out a 10-hour video on conventional forms of guard passing. Why not just be happy with that? Why do we have to learn half guard passing as well? There's an important theoretical reason why. There's also an important practical reason why. Most people are more impressed with practical reasons, so I'll start with that first. If you look at some of the greatest guard passers in the history of the game, they all worked with an ability to lock down their opponent's head and shoulders and pass from half guard top. There is no question in my mind that passing from half guard is, if it's not the absolute most high percentage method of passing, it's certainly among the top 2 or 3. It works equally well, gi and no gi. It works equally well in both grappling and mixed martial arts. It means that your opponent has very little offense to work with from bottom position. It also means your opponent can't stand up in the middle of guard passing. Always think about it. For most people, there's kind of an agreement that there's a top guy and a bottom guy in jiu-jitsu, where when Mateus is playing bottom, he's kind of agreeing to be in this position. I start seeing it. And there's kind of this unspoken gentleman's agreement that I'm the top guy passing and he's the bottom guy defending. But let's be honest, if this was a real fight, at any given moment, Mateus could just stand up on me. Okay, there's nothing to stop him just putting a hand on my body and just standing up to his feet. Okay, in jiu-jitsu we don't typically do that because we kind of have this understanding that I'm passing and he's defending, but in a fight that just goes right out the window. In half guard, that changes. If you have someone in a half guard situation and you have an underhook on the far side and your head is over their head, Mateus can't just stand up from here. Okay, he's bolted to the floor. The only way he's going to get up from this position is if he's going to get an underhook on me and then start working his way up to a single leg. And even that's pretty tough work. Just because a guy gets a single leg on you, there's no guarantee he's going to take you down. But if I have his far shoulder bolted to the ground, there's no standing up from this bottom position. As opposed to, say for example, a long step situation. My opponent's sitting up and I go into a long step. There's not a lot to stop Mateus from here just posting on my shoulder and just building up an elbow, and now he just stands up on me and again just gets away. So half guard is this incredibly controlling method which literally locks your opponent down to the mat. He can't stand up on you, can't get most of the standard submissions in the sport. It's a very, very controlling and highly effective method of passing. So because it's so versatile and applies in so many different contexts, it's one of the reasons why I put so much emphasis on it in my coaching program. Then you add to that the fact that almost all of the truly great guard passers in the sport make a heavy use of this method and have had a ton of success with it over the years in all weight categories, all belt levels. It's hard to go past this one. But that's actually not the main reason why. These practical reasons aren't the main reasons why I put so much heavy emphasis on it. It's actually a theoretical reason. If you look at conventional forms of guard passing, they all have one critical weakness. That weakness I often refer to as the cranial shift. In any given guard pass, I'll demonstrate it with a Toreando because it's the most obvious in Toreando. I start off with a control that typically begins with concern over the feet. Okay, we try to make the feet point away from us. We get to an angle on our training partner. And then from here, we have to get past the line of my opponent's hips. Then something really interesting happens. Once I've beaten the line of the hips, I have to go through and finish by controlling my opponent's head. Mateus knows that. So what he's going to do when I get past my opponent's hip line is he's going to start framing. He knows that if he can create a sufficiently strong frame, this is not a guard pass where I am right now. I don't have a pin on my opponent. Okay, I can do a touch pin, like knee on belly, for example, but that's a hard one to hold for any long period of time. At some point, if I'm going to play a pressure game on my opponent, I've got to get down chest to chest. Somewhere along the line, it has to happen. But when I do, I find to my horror that this frame is incredibly strong, and I can't get to the head and shoulders, the finishing position of every pin. I might try to come through to the hips. I might eventually control the hips, but at some point, I got to get up to the head. And when I do that, that's when the frames come in. That's when the guy blocks. That's when the knees come back in. And that's when it's like, oh man, he's got me back in guard. Okay? That transition from the hip line to the head and shoulders, the switch from controlling the hips to controlling the head, the shift from hips to cranium, the cranial shift as I refer to it, is one of the most exasperating and difficult transitions in the sport of jiu-jitsu. There's players out there who just play their whole game based on that very weakness. And they'll let you get all the way past the hip line, bang, and here. And then they'll just post, and you can't get the finish you're looking for, and you're right back in guard. And you'll see good jiu-jitsu players don't even sweat it. When someone gets past the hip line, they're like, yeah, whatever. They know they got their frames ready, bang, overcome the legs, they'll sit up and post, put the legs back in, and you're putting out all this effort just to get past the hip line, you got nothing to show for it. Okay, and it can be such an annoying thing. You know, you almost got past the legs, and then you're shut out at that last moment, and then the legs come back in. Okay, so that's the weakness which Mateus, as the guy retaining guard, can always exploit when he's defending the conventional forms of guard pass. Now, the beauty of half guard passing is that it eliminates the cranial shift. Half guard passing lets me control the head before I complete the pass. Normally, the pattern is you pass the hips and then you fight to the head as the final destination, and that's where all the problems start. Now, contrast that with half guard passing. In half guard passing, I don't have to beat the hip line, I just have to beat the knee. It's a lot easier to beat a knee than it is to beat a hip line. Okay, and then from here, I just come up the body and I get the head first. I still haven't passed his guard, okay, but the shift to the cranium occurs long before you pass the guy's guard. And as a result, once I get the head, I can start putting severe pressure on someone through the jaw or any other method from half guard. And now, with the head already locked, now I focus on passing my training partner's guard. But he can't just frame on me anymore. His head's completely locked in place. When Mateus tries to frame from positions like this, it's so damn difficult. And then from here, there's no last minute frames to worry about. There's no capacity on his part to create distance between my chest and his chest and bring his legs back in. That's why I put such a heavy emphasis on this kind of passing, because it eliminates the single biggest weakness of conventional guard passes, the single most problematic aspect. And it lets me control the head long before the guard pass is controlled. As opposed to conventional forms of guard pass, where there's no control of the head, you pass the legs, but the head feels like it's a million miles away. And you're fighting through some of the strongest structures of the human body, trying to complete guard passes, and oh no, the leg comes over, and you got to start all over again. Okay, now let's contrast that with situations where I just have to pass a knee. Okay, just push the knee down to the floor, boom, and we're in. Okay, now from here, we just start walking our way through. This guy feels, hey, situation isn't critical. I still got him on half guard, everything's fine. And so they tend to be much more accepting of us coming forward and locking up and getting to the head. And once we get up to the head, now when he tries to frame, it's too late. He can't avoid that chest-to-chest contact that makes it so easy for us to go into our passes. So this is the important theoretical reason why I put such a heavy emphasis on half guard passing, why I devoted an entire video to it, which is distinct from the other guard passes that I showed. Because the actual method of passing half guard is radically different from all the conventional guard passes that we looked at in the other guard passing video. It has an entirely different order of operations. Most conventional guard passes start at the feet, get our opponent's knees pointing away from us, crush the hips or control the hips, and then finish on the head. Half guard passing is all about just passing a knee, a relatively innocuous action, getting chest to chest contact, locking the head, and then passing your opponent's guard. So you shut down almost all of the annoying framing activity that makes it so difficult to pass using conventional methods. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some very important frames that our opponent can use. Knee shields are a good example, and these can present their own frustrations. And anyone who calls himself a master of half guard passing is going to have effective ways of dealing with those. But they are much less damaging and much less potentially hazardous than conventional frames which stop you getting chest to chest position. And that's the practical and theoretical reasons why this is such an important methodology of guard passing and why it has to be a big part of your training for the rest of your time in jiu-jitsu. Okay, we're starting to get into the core elements of our half guard passing program. Something that you're going to have to get used to is different ways to configure your upper body relative to his when it's time to pass. You've got a bunch of good options. Let's have a look at some of the main ones now. We've got an opponent down. Okay, probably the single most popular all-round upper body configuration when I'm in someone's half guard is a standard crossface, okay, where I go underneath and grip in here, and my middle finger goes to my training partner's armpit. This gives tremendous control of my opponent's shoulder, girdle, and head, and makes for a very, very strong passing platform. So this one-handed crossface is probably the first and most fundamental method of passing for both gi and no gi. A second method is what I often refer to as top, head, and arm. I'm sure there's other names for it out there, where the hands lock. And so you have a closed set of wedges around your opponent. This too creates very strong crossface pressure and is very useful both with and without the gi. There's a feeling of locked-in security here, which is impressive to work with. And you can, again, establish tremendous cross-face pressure on your training partner. This has the virtue of shutting out your opponent's underhook in this position. If he tries to swim his hand in as an underhook, my shoulder position makes that very difficult. If I hold one-handed, there's a danger my opponent can go through and start working with underhooks and working like so, okay? So those are two excellent configurations that we often see in competition. One which we're going to be spending a lot of time on involves taking our training partner's lapel and passing it underneath, and from here taking a reinforced crossface where we get a hold of our training partner's lapel and put it in so that my hand goes in the same place we would work without the gi. We go through and our hand goes underneath our training partner's shoulder. This is arguably one of the most important grips, and we'll be spending a lot of time working with this particular grip when we go through our half guard fundamentals passing program. This creates tremendous cross-face pressure. As my opponent tries to hold me off, this is a very, very strong form of gripping where you can really put on an intimidating amount of pressure upon the man on bottom. It also creates a really interesting effect. When I came through underneath and locked like so, my right arm shut out my opponent's ability to get an underhook. Interestingly, when we work with a lapel crossface, his lapel, just raise your arm, buddy, his lapel replaces my underhook. So I can get the effect of an underhook with his own lapel, okay? And so even if he got an underhook now, it would be shut down by his own lapel. He can't use it effectively. And so with one hand, I'm accomplishing what I would require two hands to use without the gi. A big part of our half guard passing program is going to be getting used to this idea of utilizing this grip whenever possible. Okay. And from here, when he tries to take his underhook and use it, that lapel grip just completely shuts down his bottom game. And it gives us the advantage of a free hand that we can use for base. Okay. It also creates the possibility of going into our next grip, which is, as my opponent goes to apply his arm, of shoving his elbow outwards and putting on a grip like so, where my head goes down to the floor, and we have our next upper body configuration we refer to as the half katagatame. Okay, you guys are all familiar with a katagatame or shoulder strangle. where we lock in like so. Okay, and we typically do this from mount or side positions, and other positions too, but those are the main ones. The half karagatame, I don't have my hands locked. I just have one hand in. The idea is not to strangle someone from here. The idea is to create passing pressure. As he tries to push me off with his hands and form frames, he can't do so because he's locked in this half karagatame. And this creates one of the strongest passing positions in the entire sport of jiu-jitsu. We're going to be spending quite a bit of time on this half karagatame method. Okay. Another upper body configuration that I often favor a lot. As much as I love underhooks on my opponent's far side, another one that I love is underhooks on the near side. Okay. And these near side underhooks, whether they be just with my hand on his back or whether they be reinforced with a collar grip, are incredibly effective ways of moving across my opponent's body and starting to pass all the way through and across onto the far side. Another upper body configuration that we're making a lot of use of are reverse cross faces. Here is a standard crossface, and a reverse crossface, I bring my elbow across just like so, and I typically sit through on my opponent. You don't have to, but it's often a good position to work from. This offers tremendous control of your opponent's head from the opposite angle. If he tries to move his head away from me, it's blocked by my tricep. Okay, he can move his head into me from here, but that's not going to help in this position. This is a great way of preventing my opponent's head from moving away from me. Okay, a standard crossface is designed to prevent my opponent's head moving towards me. That's how it shuts it out. A reverse crossface prevents it from moving away. Okay, another excellent form of upper body configuration that we can often use here is a reverse underhook, where instead of taking my right arm underneath his left arm, I put my left arm underneath, and from here, either down on my elbow or posted on my hand. This too is a very strong passing position. This also offers opportunities, if we're on the other side with backstep passes, to access our opponent's back. So this too can be a very useful one. Thank you. So there are a range of upper body positions. We'll look at those and a few others too, double underhooks, etc., etc. But those are the main upper body options that we have when we work to pass our opponent's half guard. What I want you as a developing athlete to work on is the idea that all of these upper body configurations have their good points and bad points. Try hard not to limit yourself to any one or two. Understand that even though it's natural for you to have favorite grips, favorite guard passes, etc., it's going to help your long-term development if you become familiar with all of these various means of controlling your opponent's upper body with different grip configurations, all of which enable you to pass in different directions. And for the first time, you're going to become a dangerous guard passer who can move in 3 different directions with multiple upper body grips, confusing your opponent and making it very hard for him to shut down your half guard passing game. We're trying to portray one of the great virtues of half guard passing, why it's such a big part of any strong fundamentals program, is that it gives direct access to your opponent's head. And this is something you cannot underestimate the importance of. This is a big, big deal. Almost all of the truly high percentage ways of passing tough opponents' guards comes down to some form of head control at some point in the action. The beauty of half guard is once you force half guard, you can get direct access to the head right from the start. And this is very, very helpful when you're dealing with a tough opponent in bottom position. A big part of controlling the head is the use of cross faces. And I want to take a little bit of time now just to talk to you about ideal ways of setting a cross face, because this is going to help you a lot as we get further into the half guard passing program. Okay. So often I'll see athletes do a good job of forcing their way into a half guard situation, but then a poor job of setting their cross face. The good news is the crossface is so intrinsically strong that you can mess it up to quite a large degree and still be effective with it. But the higher you go in the sport, the more you will be required to work with the most efficient forms of crossface possible. Okay? Probably the single biggest problem that I see when people go to set crossfaces is they make the mistake of holding their opponent's neck. It's an understandable mistake to make because it feels like when I'm pulling my hand and my shoulder against each other that I can put quite a bit of pressure on my opponent's neck. But in fact, you get significantly greater pressure when instead you aim your hand to go and cover the rear deltoids of your training partner's shoulders. There's a measuring stick to make sure you're doing this properly. I want you to take your middle finger and tuck it into the opening of the armpit, where the armpit meets the rear deltoid and the lat muscle, right there. That's when you know you've set your crossface properly. This positions your shoulder in the optimal position to exert maximal pressure. Now, we can massively tighten up a crossface by always looking to pull our elbow to our hip and knee. So that if I have an opponent in here, once I get my preferred grip, look how I always take everything back in. Then my first movement is forward. I bring my chin to my training partner's jaw, and then everything goes over my training partner's shoulder. And then we start walking so that our head comes down towards the mat. This puts tremendous pressure on my opponent's spine. It puts tremendous pressure on their ability to keep an aligned body. Remember, from his point of view, as the half guard guy, he wants his knees pointing towards me. That's always his goal. But if his knees are pointing east and head is pointing west, that's a real problem for him. Okay, so we're going to start off with my opponent taking a half guard situation and working towards me. Okay, we're going to go through underneath and get the hand all the way around until we can lock up, just in like so, and get our preferred grip. Sitting up with this, where our middle finger goes all the way through and connects, just in like so. Now we're going to take everything back towards our own hip. We're going to reset so that my chin goes close to his jaw, and then I put my chin outside of his shoulder, and then I start an action of walking, and I turn my hip down so that my hip goes in towards my own elbow. The further my hips from my elbow, the less power in my crossface. Remember, the true power of the crossface ultimately comes from your hips. It looks like it's the drive of the shoulder. It's not. Look how, from a situation like this, my shoulder is always limited in how far I can drive forward. It only puts a certain amount of pressure on my opponent. Make a strong body, Matthias. He pushes and pushes, and he feels pretty strong here. It's only when I walk my hips behind my crossface that I get genuine pressure. Once my elbow and hip are touching, now you have a true crossface. Will you be able to walk your hips all the way up to your elbow? Probably not. That's not the idea. The idea is just to get as close as possible. Okay. So once again, we've got an opponent in the bottom position. We go through and we secure our hand in its proper position. My middle finger tucked into the armpit. That enables me to bring his head in towards me. I bring my head over his shoulder, and then my chin over the outside of the shoulder like so. Now, as Matthias goes to hold me off, pushing on my hips, etc., we always just want to turn our hips in. That makes his legs very, very weak and unable to hold on to that half guard, and greatly facilitates our ability to start freeing the knee of the trapped leg. You know you're doing it correctly when a mild strangulation effect is imparted upon your training partner. He should feel like it's almost about to pass out from the, it's not a complete strangle, but it's a partial strangle. You can actually test this with your training partners by a very simple test. Anytime strangulation occurs, there will be bloodshot eyes, okay? So Matthias is here in front of us. He'll trap my leg, and we go in and lock our hand and position it where it should be. My middle finger in my training partner's armpit. I draw the head, I bring everything forward, and from here, we engage in that action of turning in just like so. As he tries hard to hold onto my leg with his legs, we just apply our cross-face pressure until we can go through into the pass. If Matthias faces the camera now, sitting up, Matthias, you will see very clearly that his eyes are heavily bloodshot. So that tells you that a strangle was imparted upon your training partner. The idea is not to actually pass your opponent out. That's unlikely to happen in competition. It can actually happen in drilling, so be careful of that. But it does create considerable pressure on your training partner, and that's the whole idea. Cross-facing is supposed to be an intimidating and debilitating means of controlling your opponent's head that greatly reduces his effectiveness as the bottom half guard player. Now, a huge part of our half guard passing curriculum is based around the idea of the crossface. Why? What's so special about this crossface? The crossface offers direct control of your opponent's head. Whenever we go into half guard passing, one of the most high percentage ways to affect this is to control the movement of our opponent's head, and as a result, shut down their ability to be effective in bottom position. Now, in order to do this, our method of controlling the head is almost always, not always, but almost always, some variation of the crossface. It's important you understand the variations. It's important you understand how to use each of them properly, because these will be a big part of whether you succeed or fail when it's time to pass half guard. So let's have a training partner down. We're in half guard situation, and we're going to work with cross-facing here. Let's understand right from the start that when we go to cross-face someone, the term is cross-face, but in truth, the placement of our shoulder will be in the interface between his jaw and his neck. Okay, a common misunderstanding here is that we come in and we get a hold of our opponent's face, okay, cross face. The idea is actually that we come down to the jaw. Every cross face has the same idea beneath it. We want to use our opponent's jaw as a lever, okay? Just as a good boxer uses the jaw as a lever on which to hit and achieve a knockout punch, a good grappler uses the shoulder on the line of the jaw and the chin and ultimately the neck to turn their opponent's head and control the head. So always what we're looking to do is to create conditions where my shoulder finds his neck and jaw rather than comes up to the cheekbones or anything crazy like that. And now we're in a good position to get our opponent's head well controlled. Now, there's a bunch of different ways we can affect cross-face pressure. Probably the first one that most people start off with, and the one which is most readily adaptable to both gi and no gi game, is for us to get a hold of our training partner's lat muscle, where I take my fingers and I put them right there into the space between his rear deltoids and lat muscle, just like so. When my opponent goes to move around, I put my body weight right over that hand of mine, and when he goes to move and be effective from the bottom, it's very difficult. You can exert tremendous cross-face pressure to hold people down in bottom position. Now, this grip is unsupported. It's an open wedge. However, you can use your body weight to greatly strengthen it in a very simple fashion. When I take my hand and lock in, I put my chin right over my own hand, so that this locks my body weight down over my cross-face hand. If my head is further away from my hand, he can easily move his head around and cause all kinds of problems. So we want to, as it were, solidify the wedges in place with body weight. I also do this by bringing my hips up towards his shoulders. So as he locks on a tight half guard, our whole thing is I never just put the weight of my head over my hand. I put the weight of my whole body by taking my knees off the mat, and we can exert tremendous cross-face pressure, okay? So this is the first cross-face that we must learn to use and work with. Now, as good as this cross-face is, it doesn't really make any use of the gi. Always remember, a key theme of this video is the use of yours and your opponent's gi as a force multiplier. Whatever force I can exert on my opponent by just putting an unsupported hand here is more than doubled if I take my training partner's lapel and feed it around the corner and feed it to my hand like so. What I want to do is create a situation where my thumb comes to my training partner's rear deltoid. So when I make the pass, I pass his lapel over my thumb, and my thumb is right there in the rear deltoid. Now, when I go to apply that same cross-face pressure it's held in place by the fabric of the jacket. When he tries to move me around, it's almost impossible. And from here, it's very, very easy for us to exert devastating pressure through this grip, where the thumb comes right to this area and we lock in like so. When he tries to move his head away from me, it's locked in place. Okay, it's a very, very strong grip. When we add head position and half guard position, now even when he has an underhook and tries to use it, it's almost impossible. And as my shoulder goes forward, we get that tremendous cross-face pressure that we're looking for. Understand that when we go to employ a crossface, we always do so in a way where the shoulder comes towards our hand. I never want my shoulder retracted back. We want the shoulder driving forward towards our own thumb and hand. And that's where we get true cross-face pressure. Okay. So we've seen the idea of a lat crossface, of a lapel crossface. The next one we're going to look at is often used in open guard scenarios. And this is a crossface known as the scapular crossface, where I get a grip on my training partner just like so. So I take a scapular grip on my training partner. My hand goes over the top, wrist deep, and we lock in like so, like we're throttling a motorcycle. When my head goes on the other side of my training partner's body, from here there will often be an ability to form a strong crossface using this scapular grip. And we can use this in many, many different contexts. Lying down. From split squat situations, for example, my opponent comes up, we can go through and apply that scapular grip, and as a result, from here there's going to be many ways in which we can go and start passing our training partners guard in a vast number of fashions, okay? And they all involve that useful scapular grip. Another crossface, which I often make use of, so do many other people, is a half karagatame crossface, where my opponent works like so, and we feed the hand around the corner, and he's got a hand in a familiar kind of defensive position like so. What we'll do here is we'll prop on our training partner's elbow and put our head down to the floor. Now, when he goes to push me off with that hand, it's so difficult for him to be effective, and it's a relatively simple thing for us now to start maneuvering our opponent's legs and getting a tremendous cross-face pressure using that half karagatame grip. And as a result, from here, we'll often be able to go into strong passes. This too is an incredibly effective method. Now, arguably the most powerful form of crossface, not the easiest one to get, but if you can get it, it's immensely powerful, is a lumbar or belt crossface. This we'll often use in half guard situations. And the idea is that we go all the way down to our opponent's lumbar regions in the lower back, sometimes even accessing the belt. Okay, in situations like this, I go through all the way and around, and I'll get a hold of my training partner's belt like this. This massively increases the amount of cross-face pressure that you can bring to bear against your opponent. Instead of being satisfied with grips around the shoulders, the scapula, etc., we're going further down our training partner's body, all the way down to the lumbar regions, okay? And as a result, when my training partner tries to hold on to half guards from here, you feel like you have the weight of the world upon your opponent. These lumbar grips, whether they use the belt or if his gi is locked in place, you can even just grab the gi itself, provide arguably the strongest cross-face pressure of them all. And these can be quite devastating if you can access them. They are obviously a move that favors longer, taller people. I'm roughly the same height as Mateus, and I don't have a problem getting to his belt. If you tuck your gi in, Mateus. If you can't get to the belt, it's good enough just to get down on the lumbar region, but the belt does make a difference if you can access it. So once again, from a half guard type situation, we go through on our training partner and we get a grip all the way down here in the lumbar region. So instead of being satisfied with scapular grips, thumb grips, etc., we go all the way down. Best of all is where you can actually access the belt itself. This provides tremendous pressure, okay? Now as Mateus goes to play bottom half guard game, look how from here, when we start that action of rising up, you feel like you have the weight of the world on your opponent and get a tremendous amount of pressure to bear on your opponent. Another form of crossface that we can use is a thumb or wrist crossface. We often do this out of split squat situations where we work like so. I will often place a thumb inside the back of my training partner's lapel as he goes to push us off and work from in here. As we go through, you can exert a tremendous and surprising amount of pressure just with the inside of the wrist. As you come around the corner, he tries to hold us off, and it's a difficult thing to do. So this forms a nice addition to scapular gripping. It gives you a longer sense of reach. And as your opponent goes to hold you off, you can often create a strong crossface pressure by stretching your wrist out, just like so. Okay. Another form of crossface pressure is a reverse crossface. Often used again from split squat situations where I take a cross lapel grip on my training partner. We flick the wrist to the outside and we apply a reverse crossface. This can be a useful method of getting our opponent's head turning away from us as we go to pass on the near side. The idea is that every time my opponent comes towards me, we get exposure. Look how I flick my wrist onto my training partner's jawline. Then I just pin my elbow to the opposite shoulder. As he tries to come in towards me, it forms an effective crossface technique, which enables us to move through our training partner's legs and a cross side. These are a range of different cross faces. They all have ultimately the same goals: control of your opponent's head through their jaw. You're converting the length of their jaw into a lever that culminates in your opponent's chin. The pressure is directly on the jaw, but because most of the time cross faces are applied by the shoulder to a distant observer, it will look like you're pinning their neck. There are occasions in the sport where I believe true cross faces where you put chest on face pressure are appropriate and effective. But most of the time, let's focus on putting our shoulder, wrist, or what have you upon their jawline and neck as the most effective way to operate. We've seen a range of effective methods based around one which is first and foremost used both gi and no gi, the lat crossface, like so. We've seen the lapel crossface, everybody's favorite when we're working with a jacket on. We've seen half karigatame, where we put the head down. We've seen scapular grips, where we take the middle of the scapula. We've seen inside thumb and wrist cross faces. We've seen the big daddy of them all, belt cross faces, which enable us to generate tremendous amounts of pressure. And we've seen reverse cross faces working on our training partner's jaw like so. And these two can be very, very effective as we come around our training partner's legs. Using these cross faces, the multiplicity of different cross faces is going to enable you to control your opponent's head from various open and half guard scenarios to bolt your opponent's head in place and make the task of passing guard so much easier. Don't sell yourself short. Make sure you understand all the different cross faces, their various pros and cons, and learn to use all of them to control your opponent's head as you pass half and open guard, and your job will get a lot easier. Now, we're looking at half guard chest-to-chest situation. One of the great cliches of half guard is that if the athlete on bottom has an underhook, they have some kind of advantage. The athlete is on top, they have a far side underhook, then they have the advantage. And so there's a lot of truth to this. Like any cliche, there's a lot of truth to it. And also like any cliche, it's kind of an oversimplification. We'll look at the ins and outs of it as we progress through the video. But undeniably, there's some truth to this. The idea behind it is that if I'm chest to chest with my training partner and Mateus gets the underhook on me, I have very little ability to make his shoulder touch the mat. Okay, and if Mateus can turn into me and get onto his side, that's a real issue. Ultimately, what we're looking to do when we get half guard is to put our opponent's far shoulder on the floor and create effective wedges around the head and shoulders that make it very difficult for him to move freely. Okay, he's looking for the exact opposite. He's looking to pommel his arm inside. And now, because I can't get the shoulder to the mat and he has shoulder mobility, he can start hiking his arm up in this direction here and exposing my back more and more. In addition, When he starts hiking the arm up, he can start building up to his elbow, and then things get even more complicated for me. That forces me to throw in a whizzer in the situation to protect myself, and that opens me up to a wide variety of sweeps when my opponent can reach inside my leg and start rolling me all over the mat, causing all kinds of problems. So that's why many people believe this is a serious issue if my opponent comes in and gets an underhook. So a natural question for us to ask is, well, what should I do if my opponent scores a good underhook on me? What should be my response? Well, there's a bunch of good responses. Let's start looking at some of them now. The first one we're going to do, and I strongly encourage you to begin with this one, is to walk my knee down into a kind of a quasi-mounted position, okay, often referred to as a three-quarter mount. So from a situation where my opponent gets the underhook on me, I'm going to come through and I'm going to take my cross face and take my hand all the way to my training partner's far lat muscle. Now, this underhook, the amount of danger it presents to me is proportional to my head position. The more my head comes up above the shoulder, the more dangerous that underhook becomes. So what I want to do is keep my chin down here by the elbow. And as my opponent tries to hike the underhook now, it's quite difficult. The other thing I want to do is start a walk across my opponent's body. If I can't get an underhook, one of the smartest things I can do is to walk this hip down to the floor and flatten my opponent out. From his perspective, he wants to turn onto his side and get up on an elbow. That's where he's at his most dangerous. From my perspective, I want this hip down on the floor and him flat. So I'm going to post my hands, I'm going to turn my hips through, I'm going to walk across his body. And as a result, I can put my head on the floor. Once my head touches the floor, I can take my hand off the mat and use it as an action hand wherever it's appropriate for me to put the hand. Now, I like to expose the inside of my opponent's knee by taking my leg up as he locks on tight to my leg and walking my knee across so my knee touches the floor. That exposes the inside of my training partner's knee. So I'm just going to put my hand on it, just like so. I'm going to turn my knee so that it faces his knee. And as a result, my knee comes out very easily. Even if Mateus locks as tight as he can with his leg, provided I turn my knee to face his, we'll always be able to take our knee out quite easily. Sometimes I will mix up pushing on the bottom knee with the top knee, depending on the circumstances. So as we start walking across the body, you can push on both knees. Now from here, I put my knee on the floor. Then I come up into a position that looks almost like a mounted position, okay, except of course your opponent has your ankle trapped. Now I start to look at my opponent. What I'm looking for is a reaction here. If there's no reaction and my opponent simply holds the position and dares me to move, no problem. I go underneath my training partner's head, I grab the opposite lat muscle, and then I apply a strong crossface. Apologies, Mateus. And from here, look how I turn across the body and I turn my body outwards. And as a result, we end up in the mounted position. So once you do this several times, the guy on bottom is going to figure out it's not a smart thing just to sit here and do nothing. So what they're all going to do is they're going to go to elbow escape down here. They can do it with their elbow in the classic method, or they can use their hand. It's up to them. You don't really control that, so we have to be ready for both. What we're going to do when we see the elbow escape is we're going to take our fingers and put it here inside our training partner's bicep. Then we're going to take our hand and walk it up underneath. I'm going to put my head on the floor and my other hand here on the mat. As Mateus tries to put my leg back inside his legs, we're in a good position now to drift across to the other side, pop up, and put our knee down on the floor. Then from here, I just use my head and my hands on the floor as a base of support, and then we just kick on out and find ourselves across side. So this is an excellent way for us to negate the effect of our opponent's underhook. I'll do this one now, just changing the angle so you can see my hand positions. So from here, Mateus takes the underhook. We take a crossface, and then I start walking across the body. I turn my hips and I walk across, placing my head on the floor and my knee on the mat. I intend to expose my training partner's inner knee. And as a result, my knee can come down to the floor. If Mateus doesn't react, then we go in for a cross face. This cross face allows me to turn my whole hip across the body and slap out to the mounted position. Probably Mateus will want to elbow skate to avoid that from happening. So we take our fingers and put them underneath the bicep. Now from here, I use my hands as a base of support. I make his knees turn from my right to my left. I pop up and put my knee on the floor in our favorite inside knee wedge position. Now from here, as he goes to move me around, we're in a very stable position. Then we use a simple kick out, using the sole of the foot, and we're across our training partner's side. So this is one excellent way for us to get around that common problem of our opponent taking an underhook and threatening to disrupt our balance. Another excellent way for us to act to get around this dangerous underhook situation. As my opponent comes up, not only are they looking to get an underhook, they're almost always looking to get up to an elbow as well. This is a good thing for them to do. Whenever we see this, we're going to go through and we're going to take an underhook here on this side, so that Mateus has an underhook on the far side of the body, and I have an underhook on the near side of the body. I'm going to post my hand here on the floor. I'm going to physically lift Mateus and put his shoulders down to the mat. Now from here, as we've been doing in the past, I expose the inside of his knee. I do this by putting my foot up and driving my knee to the mat. As I expose the inside of his knee, I point my knee at his, and as a result, we're able to get our knee down to the floor. Now, this time I have an underhook on this side. There's no need for me to dig under here. I've got the underhook on my left-hand side. Now, as before, I pop up, I cut my knee across, and I use my shin bone as a wedge to immobilize his hips and give me a perfect passing position as I walk around and into the pin. So once again, just facing this one with this. My opponent has a good grip, and like so, he builds up to an elbow. From here, I go underneath and get a good grip on the lat muscle. I pull my opponent off the floor, and then from here, drive him down towards the mat. From here, look how I make his knee, which is currently pointing in this direction. I want it to point the opposite way. So I turn my knee in, and I start the action of walking across the body until my knee touches the mat. Now I post inside his knee, I point my knee at his knee, and extract. From this position, I pop up, cut my knee across. As we make that knee cut, I kick out, and finish with a very nice pin. So this too is an excellent way for us to deal with this difficult situation when my opponent gets the Kimura from bottom position. Another method of dealing with Kimuras, which I strongly favor. As my opponent locks up the underhook in this situation, we can often strongly counter with Kimura locks. What my opponent wants to do is bring my head towards his head and hike up like so. What I want to do is bring my chin down over my training partner's elbow, just like so. From here, I bring my elbow over my training partner's elbow, and we start the action of sitting through towards the legs. I push the arm down into a situation that looks rather like a Kimura lock is about to come into play. But instead, we reach for our training partner's jacket and pull out the jacket like so. Very often in the course of grappling, the jacket will naturally come out. That makes your job even easier. If not, then just physically pull the hand towards you. What I do is I put my wrist on top of his wrist, and I cross my hands just like so that I can go through and make my grips without untying or releasing my opponent's arm. I don't want to be naive and just reach and grab, and now Mateus moves his wrist away from me and escapes. So we make sure we lock everything in with our hands, tie it up, and we pass our training partner's gi over to our own hand. Now when Mateus tries to free his hand, it's locked in place. I generally recommend in these situations bringing everything down towards the floor, flattening the man out. I don't want him coming up this way towards me. Okay, I want to walk everything over towards the floor. Okay. Now we get a hold on our training partner's gi pants. I always recommend first free the knee of the trapped leg. So I free the knee of the trapped leg, and then I get a hold of my training partner's gi pants right in here. Now I hike up off the floor and I bring my knee in as a wedge. I pull on my training partner's gi pants and I extract my leg and hold. If Mateus tries to get up on top of me, that one-handed Kimura grip with the lapel makes it impossible. Now from here, we simply cast our training partner's legs away from us, make the knees point away, and we're in a position now to come up and pin. I just put my hand down here on the floor. I walk around my training partner's head, and now we just settle down into a very, very strong pin with the arm trapped. As he tries to pull out of this position, it's almost impossible to hit a successful escape because he can't frame, his arm is trapped. And at any given moment, there's always an ability on our part to go forward into various forms of locks, kimuras, judo gatame, triangles, whatever you want. Okay, so let's have a look at that again. In a situation where my training partner has me here in half guard, he's got the underhook and he's doing a good job here of hiking me up. So always I want my head coming down towards his elbows. When he tries to hike that kimura up, it's a difficult thing for him to do. Now we go across, elbow to elbow, and sit through. I'm able now to lock in and get a good grip on my training partner's arm. I start working in such a way on my training partner's jacket that I can get a good grip without compromising the grip I have on his arm overall. I do that by keeping my hands and wrists close together. Now from here, as we work this position, we pass the grip up and lock onto the one-handed kimura. If you feel you're having a hard time getting the grips you're looking for, I will often recommend first loosening the jacket itself so you have the whole lapel to work with in front of you. You're going to find that creates a stronger grip to work with. You want to have a whole hand width of lapel to work with. Okay, so if you feel there's any difficulty in there, I would recommend starting by just opening up the gi. That'll make for a better situation overall. Now I trap and feed, locking up and securing the arm. As he locks in on my leg, look how I walk across the body and I first free the knee of the trapped leg. When you can see the knee, you're ready to play. Now from this position, I sit back, and there's my knee in as a wedge. As I pull on the top leg, I extract my own leg. So I'm wedging the bottom leg with my shin and pulling the top leg with my arm. So when Mateus holds on with a death grip here, look how I use the bottom knee right in there to extract, and we're free. From here, I always try to touch the knee across. If the guy's so strong that feels impossible, then just walk across his body and you'll get the knee towards the floor on the far side. Now I block the hips so Mateus can't follow me, and I walk around his body into a very strong pin. When Mateus goes to move out of here, it's exceptionally difficult. You've got a really strong pin to work with. So these are some very effective ways for us to work against against an underhook from bottom position, using that one-handed kimura and other methods to negate the power of his underhook. Now, another very effective way for us to deal with a potentially dangerous underhook is through our own reverse underhook. Now you might be saying, what the hell is a reverse underhook? Let's have a look at that now. From a situation where my training partner has an underhook on me, normally an underhook involves my left hand going underneath my training partner's right arm, or vice versa. Okay, that's a conventional underhook. A reverse underhook is one where my right arm goes underneath his right. In situations like this, we can get our arm underneath his in a rather unconventional fashion. Okay, so normally conventional underhook, my left versus his right. Reverse underhook, I punch my hand through and we end up in situations like this. Now you have a bunch of options with a reverse underhook. One is to put our hand back and get our elbow off the mat. This has a very strong wedging effect on your opponent, but it's not always possible to do if you have a strong opponent with a strong arm. So sometimes we just have to put it down on the floor like so, with the elbow on the mat. Okay. In the course of the action, that might change. For example, if my opponent goes to move towards me, then you can get the hand up. Okay, so don't think because you start in one position you have to stay there. It might be that I start here and he squeezes down on my arm. No. Yeah, and then I have to put my elbow down on the floor. It might be because he turns in towards me, and then I can bring my hand up. Okay, so be alert to the fact that sometimes you'll be elbow down, and sometimes you'll have your elbow off the mat. And be alert to that possibility. As a general rule, you get a stronger wedge like this. Okay, whereas here you get a stronger prop on the mat. Now, working from this position, very often we'll get a hold of our training partner's belt. And then from here, we'll go in and get a hold of our training partner's gi pants. I'm going to start shrimping my hips away from my training partner's hips, looking to get my knee here inside as a wedge on my training partner's knee. Now, as he goes to work here, his underhook, it gets completely negated by mine. Okay, I literally just stole the underhook position with my reverse underhook. So Mateus has an underhook on me, and then from this position, I just go in with what seems to be the wrong arm and just punch on through. I got good news for you. It's significantly easier for you to punch in a reverse underhook than a conventional underhook. Okay, if I try to get a conventional underhook on Mateus and he's got a good, well-set arm, it's very, very difficult for me to do so. I have to move my chest away from him, and now Mateus comes up on an elbow, and I'm in trouble. Okay? Let's contrast that with a reverse underhook. All I have to do is take the width of my fingers straight on through, and there's my elbow in position. There's the sit through, and we're set. So it's significantly easier to get the reverse underhook in place and negate his underhook. We just out-pommeled him with the reverse. Now from here, I get a hold of my training partner's gi pants. We start shrimping away from our training partner, pushing down, and you guessed it, in goes my knee. Now from this position, I pull on the top leg, push on the bottom leg, and there we have it. We've taken the leg out, and we're in good position, ready to go. So this is a really nice and really practical way to out-pommel our opponent's underhook and get a good attacking position courtesy of the reverse underhook. So one more time. Mateus has an excellent grip on my leg, and he has a good underhook position like so. If I were to try and pommel in here, it might be exceptionally difficult. So instead, I punch on through, and I get my hand in place, and I put my elbow all the way up in his armpit. So when Mateus tries to take his arm through and use that underhook, it's gone. Okay? You can even play tricks with your opponent here and look for his wrist. If he tries to pommel in, very often you can catch it and turn it into some of the moves that we saw earlier on in the video. Okay, keep alert to that possibility also. Now, from here, I get a hold of my training partner's belt. I get a hold of the gi pants on the outside, and I start shrimping away from my training partner's hips until I can get my knee in here as a wedge. As a result, we can go through and kick out. Okay, this too is an excellent way for us to operate.